Hello, I'm Joni Barrett with Out the Box Mind Body Studio, and this is my student Jan, and we're going to be demonstrating child's pose and down dog. And we're going to do these as posture poses for a couple of reasons, because in down dog and child's pose, we're really working on hip mobility and shoulder mobility with a stable spine in between. And so basically down dog is arms overhead with a slight hip hinge. So we think how many times during the day that we lift our hands up to reach for something, and having the ability to do that move is very important. And child's pose is just nice because it's a variation of down dog. So if you are in a yoga class and you're feeling like I need to be out of down dog, it's good to be able to come into child's pose in a way that's going to give you shoulder mobility and hip mobility, which is what we're looking for in down dog. So we're going to start Jan today in a tabletop position, which is just a nice place to start. And first, before we even begin, we're going to let her rib cage draw back a little tiny bit. Good. And then I want just to take a look at her hands, which are placed perfectly, but just so that when we come into down dog and child's pose, you have an idea, is the spacing between the fingers is important. So we want the space between each of these digits to be just about the same. And the pinky is the one that has a tendency to overextend out. So if you were in down dog or child's pose and you look and your pinky is way out here, you're just going to bring it in a little bit. So, and that's just for protection of the wrist. And then the root of the index finger, is what I call it in my class, is here. And we always want to make sure that that stays down. So we don't want any gap there. And again, that's because if you're in down dog, any sort of weight bearing, if it's lifted, it turns into this, which is not good for the shoulders. So those pieces are important. And then the other thing is to remember is where the head placement is. So we want to still really think about that gentle brushing up of the head. And when we come into down dog especially, the head suddenly is just kind of there. So it takes a little bit more concentration of where is my head. So we're in a perfect setup here for child's pose. And since we are going to be using this as a posture pose, getting into it's important. So as we start to come back, really thinking about the spine staying very still, and the hinge happens at the hip sockets. So as we make our way back towards the heels, we're going to make sure that the legs are still lined up. So we don't have the knees turned out. We don't have the feet turned out. If I stood Jan up, she would be completely standing in Tadasana. And then the arms are just a gentle extension out here. There's no weight bearing. And so for Jan, I would want her head to come up a little bit. So I would have a prop here and just let her rest her head there. So then essentially if I brush my hand, the head is exactly where we want it to be. So we have the components here are a hip hinge. So she's broadened through the sits bones as she's hinged back. So we've broadened here and opened up the SI joint. We have a nice long spine here with all of the curves present. She even has a nice little in curve here. The arms are reaching from the shoulder blades and the head is in a nice position. So that is child's pose. So I want to say just a little bit about a misalignment in child's pose if you're looking to improve your posture. So Jen, I'm just going to have you come forward a little bit. And I'm going to have you open your knees a little bit out and turn your toes in a little bit. And then I'm going to have her come back. So this is a lot of times the way people will choose to take child's pose. It's fine except for it doesn't translate into posture, because if I stood Jan up, she would be standing with her feet out. And so what we're wanting is to really train the body to stand in good Tadasana or in good posture. So by really letting the legs in child's pose, so come forward again, Jan, and go ahead and let those legs come back together, feet straight back, and then hip hinge back. We're teaching that body here that we want hip mobility in relation to the leg bones. Nice stable through the spine, and then the head is a natural extension. So now we're going to take it up to down dog. So the big thing with down dog that I see that people struggle with is they want their heels to come down. The purpose of down dog is not to get your heels to touch the mat. The purpose is to increase hip mobility and shoulder mobility and to have a stable spine in between the two pieces. So I'm just going to have her come forward. I'm going to move her block out of the way, and we're going to tuck the back toes, and we're going to come up into kind of a preliminary down dog shape. Okay, so now what I want her to do is pull forward into plank. So first thing is to have a good setup. So if you can see here, she's too short. So she can either walk her hands forward or her feet back. And I would actually even have you come a little bit more forward with your hands, Jan. So what I'm looking for and what you want to feel in your body is that this is all nice and long with your natural curves, and you feel like you're in a good extension. And then from here, I'm going to have her hug to the midline with her legs, and we're going to hip hinge up, deepening at the hip sockets as we sink back into our down dog. And if you can see here, her heels have not touched, and that's fine. We're not focusing on that. But she has a nice little bit of softness to the back of the knees, so that's good. We don't want ever a knee lock. The spine is long, but we still have our natural curves, and the arms are reaching up and out of the shoulder girdle. You can see that her hands are pressing evenly. I would walk your pinkies in a slight bit. Good. Now, once you're here in the pose, some things that you can do to enhance are to think about the abdominal muscles between the hip points and draw those closer together. You'll get a little bit more space. And then the other thing that you can do is think about hugging the legs to the midline, inner thighs, and then gently scrubbing the feet away from the midline, outer hips. So all of that is going to give a little more hip mobility, and her hands are sliding. So then we're going to let her go ahead and come back to the knees and back to child's pose. Good. So I'm going to go ahead and have Jan turn so that her body is facing the camera, and we'll come into child's pose first. So start on tabletop, and I'll just cue her through that. So the knees are underneath the hip sockets. Tops of the feet are straight back. Head, nice natural extension, so that gentle brushing. And then we're going to hip hinge back. She's going to look for the broadening through the sits bones, and then we're going to extend the neck. Good, and I'll give you a block. So, and again, don't ever be afraid when you come into a class to use the props that are there. They're going to make the pose better for you, especially if what you're looking for is to improve posture. So this would be child's pose. And then she's going to come forward, and I'll move her block away, and I'll watch she will come into down dog and widen the hands a little bit, and you may need to come on the hard floor. Maybe the hands won't slide so much. Good. So she'll check her length first by coming forward. Okay, and she's going to want to walk the feet back slightly. Good. And she'll come with a hip hinge. So she's still going to feel that broadness through the ischial tuberosities as she hip hinges back. And then from there, she can narrow the hip points with her abdominals. She can hug to the midline with her inner thighs, and she can scrub the feet away for her outer hips. And then go ahead and come back to child's pose. So this is Joni Barrett, Out the Box Mind Body Studio, and that was Adho Mukha Savasana and Balasana, down dog, and child's pose.